In the 3rd year of my marriage to Damien, he had a new lover. The night I caught them, he calmly tried to persuade me. Eleanor, married life needs some appropriate excitement as a spice. Aria's fiancé is a wonderful man. Would you like to give it a try with him? That night, the 4 of us, with an unspoken understanding, sat in a secluded private room. Sebastian's voice was cold and distant, keeping people at arm's length. Sorry, I'm not interested in other men's wives. Damien inexplicably felt a sense of relief in his heart and said with a laugh, that's really a pity. I couldn't help but steal a glance at Sebastian. The night before last, in bed, when he was clinging to me out of dissatisfaction, he didn't say that. In the 3 years after marriage, it wasn't the first time that Damien had been rumored to have an affair. It's just that with those women before, he was either being flirtatious on occasion. Or having a one-night stand and quickly cutting it off. And it never got to the point where it reached me, but this time he was obviously quite smitten. That woman was called Aria. She grew up abroad since childhood and had a bold style. When I entered the house, Aria was lying on the sofa, wearing the new pajamas that I hadn't even worn yet. There was the faint sound of water coming from the bathroom. Damien was probably taking a bath in there. Seeing me, Aria just gave a charming smile. Damien's mother. I was standing in the entrance hall with my suitcase. After a while, I said rather dryly, you seem to be wearing my pajamas. Aria gave me a non-committal look. She stood up to show off her curvaceous and voluptuous figure. But these pajamas look better on me. Damien's mother, you're a bit too thin. You can't fill them out. The pajamas were the kind with lace straps and built-in bra pads. I vaguely remembered that Damien had bought them for me last month. Men's aesthetics are probably like this, but I had been dancing since childhood and was on the thin side. I was simply not Damien's type, and Aria, even I thought she was full of vitality. No wonder Damien was so smitten this time. Even after being with her for 3 months, he was still as passionate as in the early days of their relationship. He even couldn't wait to bring her back to our marital home when I was away. Then you can have them. Anyway, I wouldn't touch them again. If she liked them, she could have them. Damien's mother is so generous. Aria raised her eyebrows and gave a laugh. Do you want to stay the night? I calmly looked at the woman in front of me. The long flight had made me very tired. I just wanted to take a bath and catch up on sleep quickly. If Aria stayed the night, then I'd stay in a hotel tonight. Before Aria could say anything, the bathroom door opened. Damien came out wearing only a towel around his waist. Seeing me, he was only slightly surprised for a moment and soon his expression returned to normal. Eleanor, why didn't you call when you came back? Damien put down the towel and walked up to me. He lowered his voice, sounding quite gentle. Sorry, I'll send her away right away. I pushed him away. I'll go take a bath first. I'm really tired. Damien considerately tidied my slightly messy hair. Wait for me. When I was doing simple skincare after taking a bath, Damien came back after sending Aria off. He stood beside me, not bothering to hide the hickeys on his neck at all. My fingers applying the face cream paused. Miss Aria doesn't seem to be single. Don't you think you should be a bit more careful? Damien looked at me with a serious expression and suddenly laughed. He leaned over and held my shoulders. Eleanor, if married life is stagnant, something will go wrong. We can't get divorced, so appropriate excitement is also a spice in marriage. I looked at the man's face in the mirror. Growing up in a family like ours, I knew from childhood that marriage wasn't free. But when I got married, I still couldn't help but have some hopes for my husband. At least we had known each other since childhood, we were childhood sweethearts. At least after getting engaged, he was considerate and gentle to me, but when he got involved with other women again and again, I was completely sober. What do you want to say? Aria's fiancé, I heard, is a wonderful man. Damien lowered his head and gently kissed my cheek. Eleanor, would you like to give it a try with him? I remember, the male movie star you like is also of this style. We can meet him first like friends. If you have a good feeling about him and think you can give it a try, then we can take the next step. How about that? I looked at myself in the mirror somewhat tranced. My husband was persuading me to accept a strange man and develop an abnormal relationship. But he didn't know that, in fact, I didn't go to Hong Kong City on business. Instead, I went to see the man I had spent a passionate night with. We were together for 3 days and 3 nights, living a life of drunkenness and dreams. This was also the first time that I tasted the pleasure of revenge. Sure, let's meet him first. The gathering like friends was set for the evening of the next day. When choosing clothes, Damien suddenly asked me, "Eleanor, what happened to your neck here?" I was just raising my hand to put on a string of pearl necklaces. Glancing at the hickey, I said in a faint voice, "A mosquito got into the hotel and bit me. Do you want to cover it up?" "No need." Damien didn't ask any more and started to pick a tie. In the end, I didn't choose the light-colored clothes I usually liked and changed into a red long dress. Damien couldn't help but look at me more. "Don't you dislike bright-colored dresses?" "I'm a bit tired of wearing light colors." Damien helped me zip up the dress and watched me take out my lipstick to touch up my makeup. Suddenly, he said rather sourly, "Somehow, I don't really want you to go." "Then don't go." Damien frowned and thought for a moment, but still he insisted, "We've already made an appointment. It's not good to stand someone up." I'll change my shoes." I bent down to change into high heels. Damien's eyes fell on my ankles and calves. "Eleanor, why do I feel that you seem to have become more beautiful after a few days on a business trip?" I smiled at him. "Maybe the environment in Hong Kong City is more nourishing." In a top-notch private club in the most secluded private room on the top floor, when Damien walked in with his arm around mine, I saw the man opposite Arya at a glance. A black handmade bespoke suit with a peaked lapel. The shirt buttons were buttoned up meticulously all the way to the top. That face was noble and aloof. He gave off an air of keeping people at arm's length all over. Even Arya, who was bold and outgoing in nature, was sitting quietly at this moment. I just took one look and then slowly lowered my eyelashes. The fingers holding my handbag tightened nervously. I never expected the Mr. Sebastian who had been entangled with me day and night in Hong Kong City a few days ago, would actually be the fiancé of Arya whom I was going to meet tonight. "Mr. Sebastian, this is my wife, Eleanor." When Damien led me over to introduce me, he seemed very nervous and his voice was shaking inexplicably. "Mr. Sebastian, nice to meet you." And when I looked at Sebastian again, I had already regained my calm. We were all adults, and we all knew what was going on in each other's minds. Sebastian also looked up at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Miss Eleanor, nice to meet you." My seat was next to Sebastian. Damien sat beside Arya. The atmosphere in the whole room was very strange. But it also had an unspoken understanding. Until more than half of the meal was over, perhaps because of having drunk some wine, Arya gradually became more talkative. "Sebastian, what do you think of Damien's mother? I told you she was very pretty, just too thin. But you seem to like fair and thin girls." I didn't respond and just quietly ate a small piece of dessert with my eyes lowered, until a large scalding palm suddenly landed on my bare knee. My hand shook and the beautiful dessert was smashed to pieces. Damien quickly asked with concern, "Eleanor, what's wrong?" I shook my head. "It's nothing, just a slip of the hand." But the back of my neck was burning. My ears were on fire. I woke up in the morning and found that my ear piercings were a bit inflamed and now they suddenly hurt and itched. I couldn't help but raise my hand and gently rub them. But then I suddenly remembered that night when we were passionately entwined, the scene of him sucking on my earlobe. And at this moment, under the cover of the white lace tablecloth, his long and powerful fingers had already landed on the inside of my thigh. I was so nervous that my whole body tensed up. But at this moment Sebastian opened his mouth. His voice was faint, neither fast nor slow. But it also had no warmth at all. "Sorry, I'm not interested in other men's wives." I couldn't help but secretly look at Sebastian. That night in bed, when he was clinging to me out of dissatisfaction, he didn't say that. Arya gave an awkward laugh. Damien was slightly stunned at first. But then, without even realizing it himself, his brows relaxed. I was so nervous that a fine layer of sweat broke out on my back. Sebastian gently held my hand as if to comfort me. Then he let go. But Sebastian grabbed my fingers instead. I wasn't prepared and let out a soft cry with a frown. Eleanor? Damien looked at me and was about to get up. I accidentally bumped my hand. It's okay. I was so nervous that a fine layer of sweat broke out on my back. Sebastian gently held my hand as if to comfort me. Then he let go. I let out a slight sigh of relief and tidied my messy skirt. When it was time to leave, Damien was originally going to send me back. But suddenly he received a call. He looked at me with a troubled expression. Eleanor, there's something going on at the company. Should I ask the driver to pick you up? Arya suddenly interrupted. Why don't Sebastian and I send Damien's mother back? Wouldn't it be too much trouble? Damien looked at Sebastian rather carefully. Sebastian didn't agree but didn't refuse either. It's not troublesome at all. Mr. Damien, you can go ahead and take care of your business. Arya quickly added. Damien gently instructed me again, promised to come home as early as possible, and then left in a hurry, but as soon as he left, Arya excused herself to go to the bathroom and disappeared. I vaguely sensed that something was wrong. I subconsciously looked at Sebastian beside me. He was leaning back in his chair, looking relaxed. But he also naturally had an air of superiority. I picked up my handbag and was about to stand up. Sebastian reached out and grabbed my wrist. The red dress is very beautiful. My eyelashes fluttered slightly, and I bit my lip and looked away. I just picked it randomly. But my cheeks were slightly flushed. When choosing clothes, actually I thought of that night. He praised me for looking good in red and that it suited my complexion. Sebastian suddenly gave a low laugh. The fingers holding my wrist tightened slightly. And I was pulled right into his arms, sitting squarely on his lap. Just as soon as I touched his hard thigh, I felt as if I'd been burned and immediately wanted to get up. Sebastian held my waist, avoiding me. I slowly closed my eyes and took a deep breath. To be honest, if I had known that Sebastian had a fiancée, I would never have gone to the hotel with him that night. I had asked him about it when I was in Hong Kong City. He said he wasn't married and didn't have a girlfriend either. So, actually, I can't really blame him for this. He didn't lie to me. He indeed wasn't married and didn't have a girlfriend. He just had a fiancée. Mr. Sebastian, I'm so sorry. Why are you sorry? First, I didn't expect that you had a fiancé. It was thoughtless of me. Second, I knew clearly that Arya had a fiancé, but I didn't think much about it and still came here to keep the appointment, causing you trouble. I lowered my eyes and pried his fingers that were holding my waist apart. I stood up and apologized earnestly. What trouble have you caused me? Sebastian was leaning against the back of the chair, still speaking in an unhurried tone, but I felt my heart tightening again and again. The light and shadow spilled down from above his head, lingering around his deep-set eyes and brows. His nose bridge was high and straight, making his facial features look particularly three-dimensional and handsome. He was a bit taller than Damien. He looked really stylish in a suit, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, a rather slender figure. But when he took off his clothes, his shoulders, back, and abdomen were all more muscular than Damien's. A man like this had strong physical strength. He also had the ambition and imposing manner built up by money and power. I knew that I had gotten myself involved with him and it was almost impossible to get out unscathed. But at this moment, there was no other way. I could only try to be as humble as possible, hoping that he would let this matter pass without leaving a trace. You said just now that you weren't interested in other people's wives. I summoned up the courage to look him in the eye. That's why I'm worried that I've caused you trouble. Don't you think it's a bit too late to be worried now? I was left speechless. Yes, he hadn't asked me. But at that time, I hadn't been honest with him either, telling him that I was already married. I'm sorry. I could only say it again. I was so embarrassed that I didn't dare to look at him again, and my voice was trembling. You should be able to tell the relationship between Arya and me. I nodded slightly. Indeed, there should be some kind of very open way of getting along between them. He didn't seem to care that his fiancée was involved with other men either. So, regarding Arya, you don't need to worry about causing me trouble. But Eleanor, Sebastian said as he slowly stood up. He took a step towards me, and his tall figure completely enveloped me. I subconsciously took a step back, but he gently grasped my wrist bone. I do mind that you are Damien's wife. I opened my eyes in astonishment, Mr. Sebastian. Sebastian's eyes were very cold when he wasn't smiling, his slender fingers moved up from my wrist bone and finally pinched my jaw. I was trembling slightly. A man who could make the always proud Damien feel afraid. I didn't dare to imagine how terrifying his background might be. I had lied to him and made him look bad. How would he take revenge on me? I'm sorry, besides I'm sorry, what else can you say? I turned my face away, only feeling that my jaw was pinched so hard that it hurt. I couldn't help but want to cry. But suddenly, Sebastian lowered his head and kissed me. I subconsciously tried to push him away. Sebastian, however, grasped my wrists and pinned them directly behind my lower back. Eleanor. He didn't kiss me deeply. In fact, it was even rather gentle. Open your mouth. Sebastian gave my lips a light bite. Give me some response. There's still room for negotiation about this matter, Eleanor. I didn't know to what extent I could satisfy him. I didn't know how long I had been kissing him on my own initiative either. I only remembered in a daze. It seemed that in the end, my calves were so weak that I could hardly stand. Both Sebastian and I were on the verge of losing control. But he pushed me away. I fell onto the chair, my skirt in disarray. Sebastian tidied his clothes unhurriedly. Finally, he just said to me, "Let's go. I'll take you home." When the car door opened, Arya was already sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't look at her, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that Arya glanced at me several times when I got into the car. When we arrived at the entrance of the villa, I thanked him softly and got out of the car to leave. The car didn't stop and drove away quickly. Damien hadn't come back yet. I took a bath wearily. While drying my hair, he called me, "Sorry, Eleanor. The company's situation is quite serious and hasn't been dealt with yet. I probably won't be able to go back tonight." After hanging up the phone, I lay on the bed. There weren't any messy thoughts in my heart. I wasn't interested in verifying the truth of Damien's words either. But I guessed that it was just another high-sounding excuse to cover up his own actions. But I didn't expect that this time, Damien wasn't lying to me. For a whole week, Damien didn't come home. There was no news from Sebastian either. And I didn't know that at this moment, Damien was standing in Sebastian's office with a dejected look. On the table in front of him were a stack of photos. The photos showed every private meeting between him and Arya. Mr. Sebastian? Damien felt that his whole body was soaked with cold sweat. He was extremely regretful at this moment. He regretted that he had been so infatuated with Arya. He regretted that he had touched a woman he should never have provoked. He regretted even more that he had been so carried away on his own turf that so many photos had been taken of him. Even though Arya and Sebastian each did their own thing and didn't interfere with each other, but having private affairs was one thing, and causing a big stir with negative news was another. What's more, Sebastian had spent a huge amount of money to buy out these photos. For the first time in his life, Damien felt a fear of being on the verge of death. "Mr. Damien, now that things have come to this, let's talk about how to solve it." Sebastian was sitting, but his imposing manner still firmly overshadowed Damien's. "We are both businessmen. We should be clear that businessmen never do business at a loss." "I know, Mr. Sebastian. It was thoughtless of me." Damien was sweating profusely. By now, what else wasn't he clear about? The one difficulty after another in the company was all Sebastian's means of revenge. But he couldn't even complain. After all, he had brought all this upon himself. "Mr. Damien doesn't need to say these things to me. I just need a reasonable solution now, as well as compensation." Damien seemed to have grasped a life-saving straw. "Mr. Sebastian, how do you want to solve it?" "As long as I can do it." Sebastian looked up at him, his eyes calm. "How has Miss Eleanor been lately?" Damien was stunned for a moment. Immediately, it was as if an electric current suddenly passed through his heart. But it also made him instantly sober. Sebastian wouldn't mention Eleanor for no reason. So, was he interested in Eleanor? But clearly last time, he had taken Eleanor to the appointment according to what Arya had said. Sebastian's attitude was very clear. He didn't like married women. I've been busy with the company's affairs these days and haven't been home. I haven't seen her yet. Damien chose his words carefully and watched Sebastian's face. There was no emotion on his face. He just nodded slightly. Please send my regards to Miss Eleanor. Okay, Mr. Sebastian. Damien watched Sebastian stand up. It seemed that he was going to end the topic, but the matter today hadn't been solved yet. If Sebastian didn't relent, Damien didn't dare to think about how many days the company could hold on. His face was as white as a sheet, and he clenched his teeth tightly. Mr. Sebastian, are you free tonight? Sebastian didn't respond. He just looked at him. If you are free, I'd like to invite you to dinner. I'm not free. I'm not free? I was thinking of inviting Eleanor along too. Sebastian seemed to smile faintly. If Miss Eleanor comes, then of course I'm free. Since you're willing to do me the favor, I'll book a table right now. Damien suddenly felt the huge stone in his heart drop, but at the same time an indescribable emotion welled up in him. Even if he was a bit slow, he could still see it. Sebastian was interested in his wife. And he had to pretend to know nothing and personally hand his wife over to him to save himself and the company. Damien had no choice. He didn't even struggle for long. By the way, Mr. Damien. When Sebastian was leaving the office, he suddenly stopped and looked back at Damien. Once again, I'm not interested in other people's wives. It took Damien a full half a minute to come to his senses. He finally understood how stupid he had been. So last time when they met, the meaning of Sebastian's words. It wasn't that he wasn't interested in Eleanor. He was subtly but clearly reminding him. Sebastian minded deeply that Eleanor was his Damien's wife. When Damien came back, I had just woken up from my afternoon nap. He walked into the bedroom and stood by the bed looking at me for a while without saying a word. Hasn't the company's problem been solved? I asked with a frown. Eleanor. Damien suddenly grasped my hand. You've been wronged in the years since you married me. I was a bit surprised, but before I could say anything, he said very softly, let's get divorced. Don't worry. The divorce won't affect your Eleanor family. It won't affect any of your interests either. Damien's face was pale and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't seem to need my answer. He was just talking to himself. Actually, I had thought about getting divorced. But if I got divorced, I would surely be forced by my family to enter into another arranged marriage. It would just be repeating the same tragedy. Weighing the pros and cons. At least Damien and I had known each other for years and he still had some conscience. Our Eleanor family now had deep business dealings with the Damien family and was deeply involved, but now that Damien had brought it up himself, suddenly I felt that getting divorced might not be a bad thing. What's more, Damien had taken the initiative to say that it wouldn't affect the Eleanor family. I had been extremely disappointed in marriage. Perhaps I would stay single from now on. The matter of my divorce from Damien was settled in just 2 hours. The content of the divorce agreement was very favorable to both me and the Eleanor family. I didn't think about it for too long and signed it. Let's have a meal together. Damien glanced at me while driving. Eleanor, I've already booked the restaurant you like. I agreed without thinking too much. I simply thought it was the last time we would eat together, but I never expected that Sebastian would come. I looked at Damien, my voice a bit stiff. So, it was you who invited Mr. Sebastian? Damien looked away. Eleanor, it's just a meal together. Is it just a meal together? I asked in return. Damien avoided answering, but I already knew the answer. I didn't say anything. I just lowered my head looking at the mark that still remained on my ring finger after I took off my wedding ring, even though by now the love for Damien had long disappeared. But even if I didn't love him and didn't care about him, when I really knew that my former husband had actually calculated to push me to another man, I still felt uncomfortable and ashamed. My tears started to fall out of control, dropping down in big drops, but Damien stood silently beside me for a few seconds. Then he turned around and left. He was even extremely considerate to close the door of the room. Sebastian walked up to me. He didn't comfort me nor did he mock me with cold words. He just patiently wiped my tears with a tissue. He wiped my tears for as long as I cried, until finally I was tired from crying and my eyes were swollen. Then he pulled me up. Go wash your face and then have something to eat. I went to the washroom. Sebastian walked to the end of the corridor to smoke. Damien followed somehow and said, "Mr. Sebastian, I've divorced Eleanor." Sebastian's voice was cold. "Then from now on, remember your own identity clearly." Damien suddenly smiled. "Mr. Sebastian, a man like you surely wouldn't have only one woman." Sebastian turned around and looked at him coldly. But Damien lowered his eyes and looked at the ground. "When you return to Gangcheng and everything is settled, I'll remarry Eleanor." Damien. He looked up subconsciously. This was the first time Sebastian had called his full name. "You won't have this chance." Damien's eyes suddenly widened. "Mr. Sebastian, what do you mean by that?" He slowly crushed the lit cigarette. "Do you think I was just attracted by her looks on a whim?" Sebastian looked down at the man in front of him. He had come this far step by step and finally got what he wanted. He couldn't count how many sleepless nights he had spent, but Sebastian knew clearly. From now on Eleanor would be by his side every night. Damien stared in panic and took a few steps back in a daze. Pointing at Sebastian, his voice trembled. It was you who plotted against me. It was you who set me up. You even pushed your own fiancé out to be a pawn." Sebastian seemed to be looking at a fool. "Damien, you're even stupider than I thought. A woman like Arya could never be his fiancé. And how could a man use his own fiancée as a pawn to tempt his rival?" "Sebastian, aren't you afraid that I'll tell Eleanor?" "Go ahead if you want." Sebastian's tone was indifferent. He walked forward slowly without a care. "If you want everyone to admire your heroic deeds in bed, then go and tell Eleanor everything." "Sebastian, you're shameless, shameless." Damien's eyes were red with anger. But his voice obviously got lower. Sebastian ignored all this. Shameless? Whether it was shameless or despicable, it was better than the torment of being restless day and night just thinking about that name and that person. After coming out of the washroom and just hanging up the call from my mom, Damien's mother called again. I guessed that the two families' elders already knew about my divorce from Damien. I hesitated for a moment and refused to answer Damien's mother's call for the first time. Eleanor's family was from a scholarly family, but it had declined in recent years. Damien's family was a newly rich family, wealthy and powerful. When we got engaged, the two families were of equal status and Damien's mother had a fairly good attitude towards me. But by the time of our marriage, Damien's family had risen in status and her attitude towards me had become haughty. Moreover, after 3 years of marriage, I hadn't had a child. In the end, Damien's mother even put all the blame on me, but less than 5 minutes after I refused the call, my mom called again. "Eleanor, aren't you being a bit rude? Also, divorce isn't a joke. None of our elders have agreed to it, so it doesn't count." I felt exhausted both physically and mentally. Go and talk to Damien. Don't call me again. As soon as I hung up the call, my phone started vibrating again. So I simply turned it off. When I was feeling restless, Sebastian suddenly spoke. "Would you like to come with me to live in Gangcheng for a while to relax?" I couldn't help but scrutinize the man in front of me. He was born into a privileged family with a mysterious background. Just because of a simple sentence, "I'm not interested in other men's wives," I went from being Damien's wife to being single. For a man like him, it would probably be effortless for him to get whatever he wanted. Besides, that night was my own choice. I was willing to go to the hotel with him. Last time when I went to Gangcheng, no one forced me to go. I was very happy during those 3 days and 3 nights. I used to be Damien's wife, and now I'm single. I've even removed the last mental shackle. Only at that time, I thought he was single. But now, he has a fiancée. Mr. Sebastian, I really appreciate your kindness. But since I know you have a fiancée, Eleanor." Sebastian suddenly held my hand and rubbed his fingertip against the faint mark on my ring finger. And it was only then that I realized. Sebastian wasn't wearing an engagement ring on his left hand. It had been like this since the first time I was with him. But that didn't seem to prove anything. There are plenty of men who don't wear their wedding rings after getting married and pretend to be single. I subconsciously tried to pull my hand back. But Sebastian looked at me and said seriously, I have nothing to do with Aria. She's an artist signed by an entertainment company under my name overseas. I give her resources, and she helps me fend off some unnecessary troubles. You know, there are too many people who want to send women to my side. Sebastian said this and gently held my hand. Eleanor, do you have any other questions? My mind went blank for a while. But in a flash, I caught a key point. Did you give Aria any instructions regarding her and Damien's affairs? The relationship between them was more like that of a superior and a subordinate rather than a cooperative one. Aria was obviously afraid of him and obeyed him completely. Even if she was just a shield, Aria wouldn't dare to have an unclear relationship with other men. Sebastian's expression didn't change at all. He looked at me frankly. Aria was shooting a promotional short film for Damien's company before, and that's how they met. Damien asked her out for dinner that night. Aria refused 3 times. Damien kept pestering her. Sebastian chuckled. Eleanor, I didn't know you at that time. Why would I instruct Aria to seduce Damien? He was right. Sebastian was far away in Gangcheng at that time. And he didn't seem like such a boring person. Moreover, a woman like Aria was practically tailor-made for Damien. Every inch of her was exactly to his liking. I see. Actually, it seems meaningless to pursue these issues now. Damien didn't cheat because he knew Aria. Even without Aria, there would be other women. I suddenly seemed to let go of everything. But I didn't want to recall the past at all. How long will we go for? I asked Sebastian. How long do you want to go for? I thought about it. 2 weeks? Or 1 week? How long does Damien's interest in women usually last? That could probably be used as a reference, but sometimes it's a day, sometimes a week. Aria was for 3 months. Maybe it'll be even longer in the future. I was a bit hesitant. Sebastian said slowly, Christmas is in 1 month. Why not spend the festival in Gangcheng first? There will be a cruise party during Christmas, and it's said that there will be fireworks all night. After that, he added, I think Damien's family will be in chaos for a while. Damien's mother is really difficult to deal with. Also, your mother's side. If you stay here, you'll be upset. It's better to go out for a walk. I was a bit tempted by what he said. Moreover, I had a great time with him during those 3 days in Gangcheng. If you have fun, you can stay longer. If you want to come back, I'll send you. Eleanor, you don't need to have any worries when you're with me. I thought about it seriously for a while and then nodded. Okay. Sebastian seemed to be in a good mood. Let's go home first. You need to have a good rest today. He naturally held my hand and walked out. After getting in the car and returning to his residence in Beijing, the first time between a man and a woman is often difficult. But after the first time, everything seems to fall into place. When I was changing my shoes, Sebastian gently put his arm around my waist. When I stood up straight, he had already pushed me against the back of the door and kissed me. I had drunk some red wine during dinner. I was in a slightly tipsy state. He carried me to the bathroom, and I just hung limply on him, lying on his shoulder. You need to gain a little weight. Sebastian's hand stroked my back, and his voice was filled with laughter and a barely perceptible tenderness. I could even feel his fingertip rubbing against every inch of my spine. Teachers have always been very strict about weight when I was young. I often went hungry and got used to eating very little. Dieting is bad for your body. Don't you remember that you almost fainted from hypoglycemia last time in Gangcheng? He placed me on the vanity counter, and his kisses fell gently on the side of my neck. The hem of my dress was rolled up, dangling at the seam of his pants. I was a bit out of breath from his kisses. But if I eat a little more, my stomach will feel uncomfortable. Don't worry. We'll take it slow to adjust in the future. His fingers landed on the zipper at my back. The satin dress slid down like water, piling up around my waist. Sebastian's kisses went all the way down. Eleanor, spread your legs. His knee pushed my calves apart. He then held my ankle and made me hook it around his waist. Sebastian. I subconsciously pinched his hard arm, the halo above my head fell in a hazy way. Maybe it was because the light was too gentle that it made his eyebrows and eyes look softer. I was almost charmed into submission. After a long while, the vanity counter was in a mess. Sebastian kissed my sweaty forehead. Let's take a bath. I don't want to, okay? He agreed, but it was all just to coax me. In the end, the bathroom was also in such a mess that it was unbearable to look at. There was water all over the floor. Sebastian, don't let the maids clean up here tomorrow. He carried me back to the bedroom, his voice full of laughter. Okay, I'll clean up tomorrow. I'm so sleepy and tired. I really don't want to do anything else. Okay. I lay on his chest, yawned and closed my eyes. Sebastian. If you want to end this, remember to tell me in advance. I didn't hear his response. I opened my eyes sleepily to look at him. But after just one look, I couldn't hold on any longer and fell asleep. Sebastian placed me on the bed and covered me with the quilt. I slept soundly, and I didn't know that he lowered his head, kissed my eyebrows lovingly, and then got up to go to the terrace to make a call. Go and prepare what I told you before. Sebastian held his phone and looked out at the vast sky. It's time for the Sebastian family to have a wedding. The day before I was about to set off for Hong Kong City, I made an appointment to have dinner with my best friend, Isadora. Towards the end of the meal, Sebastian called me. Eleanor, I'll come to pick you up in a while. Isadora and I still want to chat for a bit longer. Besides, you don't really need to pick me up. We can just take a cab back, call me when you're done, and I'll come to get you. Alright. After hanging up the phone, Isadora propped her chin on her hand and looked at me with great interest. Eleanor, there's something different about you. Really? When Damien used to pick you up or when you answered his calls before, you didn't have the expression you had just now. What kind of expression? Isadora gave a rather mischievous laugh. How should I put it? It was very gentle and feminine. I couldn't help but glare at her. I've always been gentle. It's not the same. Isadora suppressed her smile and looked at me very seriously. Eleanor, I hope you'll be happy. In the few years since you got married, I didn't see the word happiness on your face. I was a bit stunned. Happy? Actually, during the honeymoon period right after getting married, there was a time when I was happy, right? But it quickly disappeared with Damien's affairs and his cheating, although I don't know much about Mr. Sebastian. But I know you very well, Eleanor. Your state can't deceive people. Isadora held my hand and gave it a firm squeeze. You're my best friend, Eleanor. I hope that this time, the person you meet is the right one in your life. But will it be? I thought of the night when I first met Sebastian. Among so many people, why was it that I noticed him at first sight? And why, when I had always been cautious and abided by etiquette, did I suddenly have the thought of being rebellious and indulging myself just once? And how could Sebastian have agreed to the invitation of a woman who was dead drunk and had her makeup smeared? From that night, and then the 3 days and 3 nights in Hong Kong City later, I had always thought that it was just a casual relationship that adults with experience knew well. I never expected it would come to this. I don't know what I'll experience or how it will end when I go to Hong Kong City with him this time. But life is full of uncertainties one after another. Maybe I don't need to think too much. Just being with the person you like and doing happy things together is enough. When Sebastian drove over, Isadora and I looked out through the glass window. The night in Beijing was ablaze with lights. The traffic was like a flowing river, and the people coming and going were shuttling back and forth. Sebastian got out of the car and walked straight towards the restaurant without looking sideways. Isadora winked at me. Not bad, a hot and aloof hunk. My face suddenly turned red. Sebastian did look cold and difficult to approach on the outside. But what he was like in private, no one on the outside really knew. Why are you blushing? Isadora playfully pushed me. You naughty girl, having such a good time without telling me. No wonder your skin looks amazingly good today when you came out. I originally thought you had secretly done some new beauty treatment without telling me. Humph. So it turns out you've been taken care of by your man. I felt so uncomfortable that I grabbed my bag and stood up. You should go and fall in love quickly. Then I'll also have a lot to say to you. Isadora followed me out, giggling. Sebastian naturally took my bag and then offered to send Isadora back first. Isadora, however, waved her hand. No need. I already called a cab just now, and it's almost here. Let me know when you get home. Sure. Isadora waved at me with a sly smile. But as soon as she turned around, she bumped into a man. Isadora staggered and almost fell. Fortunately, the gentleman was quite chivalrous and helped her in time. Sorry, sir. I didn't mean it. Isadora apologized a bit embarrassedly. It's okay. The man glanced at Isadora and then turned around and walked towards the restaurant. Isadora, be more careful when you walk in the future. I was a bit helpless. Before, Isadora had a habit of not looking where she was walking and once bumped her nose so hard that it bled. Okay. Isadora hugged my arm and shook it. And the man who had just turned around and walked a few steps suddenly stopped and turned back. He looked at Isadora for a while and then suddenly said, "Your name is Cece?" Isadora was a bit taken aback, but still laughed heartlessly. Yes, my name is Isadora. That was the first time that 34-year-old Lucien met 24-year-old Isadora. Just at that time, between him and Isadora, and between me and Sebastian, none of us realized that at the beginning of some stories, there were already 4 words written: fate plays tricks. On the day I arrived in Hong Kong City, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was actually Damien's mother. As soon as I answered the call and before I could even say anything, Damien's mother lashed out at me. "Eleanor, even if you and Damien are divorced, it's only been a few days since you signed the papers and you're already going to Hong Kong City with another man. Where do you put the face of the Damien family? Is this how your parents taught you? You've been married into the Damien family for 3 years. The Damien family has provided you with good food and a comfortable life. You couldn't have children, but I didn't ask Damien to divorce you. And you're good. As soon as something happened to the company, you just left without a care." Damien's mother was obviously extremely angry and her words became more and more unpleasant. "I tell you, I can't swallow this insult. How much advantage has your Eleanor family taken from the Damien family in these years? One can't be so ungrateful." I couldn't help but interrupt her. "Damien's mother, if you have any complaints about the business cooperation between the 2 families, please discuss it with my father and brother. After all, I've never been involved in the business matters from the beginning to the end. If you have any objections to the divorce, please go to your son and ask him the reason." Damien's mother was choked by my words. "Eleanor, what do you mean by that? Are you completely innocent and blameless?" Damien's mother, "Don't call me anymore. Damien and I are no longer husband and wife, and I have nothing to do with you anymore. Please don't harass me, Eleanor." I was too lazy to argue and just hung up the phone directly. But my good mood was still ruined by Damien's mother. I sat on the sofa feeling gloomy and not wanting to talk. Sebastian pulled me to stand up. "Go and change into a beautiful dress. I'll take you to Victoria Harbour to watch the fireworks tonight." "Sebastian? I'm so tired." I didn't want to move or talk. Lying on his chest, my voice was also listless. Sebastian rubbed my hair. "There won't be these annoying things anymore." "Will there?" "Of course." Sebastian lowered his head and kissed me. "Don't be unhappy. Believe me. Women are emotional creatures." I, who was still gloomy an hour ago, at this moment standing under the sky full of fireworks in a beautiful new dress, suddenly felt better. Surprisingly, there was a classical dance performance at the cruise party. When I was watching it intently, suddenly the several dancing girls ran over and surrounded me and led me onto the stage. After getting married, except in the dance studio, I hardly participated in any performances. Dancing on stage seemed as far away as in my past life. But I quickly caught up with the rhythm. When the skirt was fluttering, what I was actually thinking was, Sebastian chose this dress. So he had planned this all along. After this dance, the music changed to a beautiful and melodious violin solo. The fireworks in the sky were blooming brightly. Sebastian, who had changed into a formal suit, was walking towards me with a bouquet of roses. I was stunned. He looked as if he was about to propose. At the beginning between us, it was just a moment of infatuation. But Sebastian had already knelt down on one knee. Countless laughter and applause rang out around us. I was gently pushed to him by the people around me. My mind was in a mess. Before I could even come to my senses, the diamond ring had already been put on my ring finger. Eleanor, could you please put it on for me too? Sebastian looked at me and handed me his left hand. At this moment, my heart suddenly felt at ease. Sebastian. I took the ring, looked at him and smiled, but tears uncontrollably fell. I'm willing to believe you once, but only once. The ring was slowly slipped onto his finger. Sebastian stood up and hugged me tightly. Eleanor, I'll prove it to you with my whole life. The Damien family didn't harass me anymore. I heard that Damien's company still hadn't improved much and he was extremely busy. Damien's mother was also busy choosing a new daughter-in-law who suited her taste, so that she could quickly marry her into the Damien family to carry on the family line. The Eleanor family, on the other hand, would call from time to time. Even my usually strict and harsh father had become a lot more amiable towards me, but I knew very clearly in my heart, I won't let the Eleanor family attach themselves to Sebastian. Nor will I cause these unnecessary troubles for Sebastian. So I've always maintained a polite and distant attitude towards the Eleanor family. I heard that my father was very unhappy about this. He even cursed me for being unfilial after getting drunk. So what is filial piety? Is sacrificing one's own happiness to seek benefits for the natal family called filial piety? Then I'd rather be an unfilial daughter. Sebastian and I got engaged in March when the flowers were in full bloom. When I got engaged, Isadora naturally came to Hong Kong City too. But the girl who used to be lively and vivacious now had a faint trace of sadness between her eyebrows. I asked her if she was in love or had someone she liked. Isadora, however, shook her head. Eleanor, I don't know if what we have can be considered as being in love. Even though we meet every day, I still feel that there's a great distance between us. As she was talking, her eyes turned red. Eleanor, liking someone should be a happy thing, but why? I always feel sad. I could only try to comfort her. Isadora, remember, even if you really like someone, you should always put yourself first. If it's really painful, force yourself to let go. Isadora suddenly burst into tears. But I can't do it, Eleanor. I really like him so much. Just thinking about breaking up with him makes me feel as if I'm going to die of sadness. Stay in Hong Kong City for a while. It'll also be a good chance to think calmly. But Isadora was restless and stared at her phone all the time. She was waiting for his call and messages. The day after my engagement ceremony, she hurriedly flew back to Beijing. I was worried about her, but Sebastian advised me, let her be. You can't force this kind of thing. Really? Of course, matters of the heart can't be forced. Just like I only have feelings for you. Did you put honey on your lips today, Sebastian? I couldn't help but laugh while a sweet feeling welled up in my heart. Isadora was right. Loving someone should be a happy thing. Then do you want to have a taste? Sebastian lowered his head to kiss me. I dodged twice and then obediently let him do as he pleased. Sebastian, when I got married to Eleanor, Damien got into trouble. He suffered one setback after another in his business and was heavily in debt. He went to Macau to relax because he was in a bad mood. First, he lost money gambling, and then he was set up by a prostitute. He was caught half naked on the hotel bed. Finally, the Damien family managed to scrape together 10 million yuan with great difficulty to get him out of the mess. But from then on, he was completely down and out. Damien's mother was so angry about this that she almost lost her life. I didn't let Eleanor know about these things. She was about to become my bride. Getting married was a big happy event for the two of us. Her good mood shouldn't be spoiled by these insignificant people and things. Actually, it was quite normal for Damien to end up like this. A man like him who was so fickle and easily lured by women was bound to get into trouble because of women sooner or later. I just always felt a bit regretful. Why did I meet Eleanor so late? If we had met before she got married, she wouldn't have had to endure the hardships of these 3 years. But I was also very glad. That night I didn't reject her even though she was a bit embarrassed. That night I took her back to the hotel as if guided by some mysterious force. After she took a bath, she stood in front of me like a lotus emerging from clear water. When I saw her still gentle and beautiful face, I suddenly realized. It turns out that everything is arranged by fate in the unseen. Just like when I first saw her when she was young, I fell in love at first sight. After so many years, I would fall in love with her again, but Eleanor didn't remember me at all. She was even already someone else's wife. But it didn't matter. If you're married, you can get divorced. Especially with such a scummy husband. When I untied her bathrobe and kissed her, she cried. I knew how much disappointment and grievance Eleanor had accumulated before taking this step. I was extremely glad that she came to me. And I didn't reject her. At first she was clumsy and stiff and kept crying. I comforted her for a long time until she got used to it and was lost in the moment. In the end, she melted into soft water beneath me. I coaxed her to call my name. Over and over again, not allowing her to stop. When she felt good, there was still a look of grievance in her eyes when she looked at me. I held her in my arms. She was very obedient, but maybe she was too tired, so she didn't push me away. When she was half asleep and half awake, she still didn't forget to remind me, tomorrow we'll be strangers. Don't meet again. But how could she know? Having come this far, there was no way I would let go. It was also from that night that I made that decision. Step by step, I made her come to my side. For the rest of my life, I will love only her wholeheartedly, but this secret, I will also keep it hidden until the day I die. Eleanor had changed into her wedding dress. I handed my phone to my assistant and turned to walk towards her. She looked at me and smiled shyly and gently. The elaborate white wedding dress made her look as beautiful as a lily, just like she was when she was 14. She was wearing a white dress and riding a bicycle, but mischievously controlling the handlebars with one hand. In the other hand, she was holding an ice cream cone. The ice cream was melting and getting her hands dirty. She got a bit flustered. The handlebars wobbled and the bike went out of control. It crashed straight into the front of my car. She fell. The skin on her calf was scraped and bled a lot. She cried because of the pain. When I got out of the car to help her, the melted ice cream on her hand smeared all over my shirt. She was sobbing but still didn't forget to apologize to me. I took her to a nearby clinic. When the doctor was disinfecting her wound, she cried out in a spoiled way. I could only cover her eyes so she wouldn't see, and I coaxed her a bit clumsily. Later, her classmates came to look for her, saying that the dance teacher was waiting impatiently. She broke free from my hand, thanked me hurriedly, and left in a hurry. At that time, I thought we would meet again soon. But unexpectedly, the next day my mother and I were taken to Hong Kong by my biological father. My half-brother's family was killed in a car accident and they didn't leave any children. I became my father's only son. My mother, who came from a humble background, finally got her wish to enter the Sebastian family's door. And I, who was originally an illegitimate child, suddenly became the only heir. My fate had been turned upside down from this moment. My life was arranged arbitrarily by my father. But when it came to getting married, I wouldn't budge an inch. My father was getting old. An aging lion would eventually have to bow to the younger generation who were catching up. He finally had to compromise. Eleanor. I looked at my wife and held out my hand to her. She was a bit shy and gently placed her hand in my palm. I held her fingers tightly. And this time, once I held it, I would never let go again. The end.